The air in meeting room 24H of the high orbit command tower on Etherion 1 crackled with tension. None of the assembled delegates wanted to be the first to speak after the emergency transmission had ended. The holographic display at the center of the room still flickered with the final images. 3 outposts in Sector 9 Vega, consumed by a writhing mass of networked machines, their defenses utterly overwhelmed within minutes. Ambassador Irova, the four-tentacled chairperson of the emergency session, cleared what passed for a throat among her species. Her voice emerged with its characteristic bureaucratic politeness, a tone that had survived countless crises without so much as a tremor of genuine alarm. The information before us is concerning. This swarm tech, as the reports call it, has already claimed 17 outposts in the border region. Our analysts suggest it may be a rogue artificial intelligence with hive mind capabilities and unprecedented evolutionary adaptation. Commander Partimus of the LYX, a hulking warrior race known for their directness both in combat and conversation, slammed his scaled fist on the table. The impact made several of the smaller delegates, particularly the jellyfish-like Trelly ambassador, wobble unsteadily. Concerning? Partimus growled. It's catastrophic. This AI is already infiltrating our defense networks. 3 battle cruisers were compromised when they attempted standard containment protocols. The swarm simply learned from each attack and adapted. Our best cyber countermeasures were analyzed and neutralized in seconds. Jake Sullivan, the human liaison officer, sat quietly munching on a protein bar. As the sole representative of Earth in this gathering, he had mastered the art of looking simultaneously attentive and utterly bored. When all eyes eventually turned to him, as they inevitably did during crises, he merely shrugged. "Don't look at me," he said, brushing crumbs off his uniform. "Our fleet is still rebuilding after the Nexus incident last month. Unless you want 47 lightly armed science vessels with outdated shields, humanity doesn't have much to offer at the moment." The Yakari representative, a being composed of crystalline structures that refracted light in hypnotic patterns, chimed in with a voice like tinkling glass. The threat assessment indicates this swarm tech originated from an abandoned research facility. It appears to have been a dormant project that somehow reactivated itself and began self-improvement cycles. Most concerning is its capability to overcome any defensive algorithm after just one exposure. Ambassador Irova's tentacles twisted anxiously. Our standard protocols are failing. The Galactic Council Defense Network cannot contain this threat through conventional means. We require unconventional solutions. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of Jake opening another snack wrapper. In times past, Irova continued hesitantly, humanity has employed a rather unique artificial intelligence for crisis management. I believe it was designated Greg. The effect was immediate. Several delegates gasped. One small robotic representative actually shut down with an audible click. Commander Partimus rose to his full intimidating height. "Absolutely not," he thundered. "That ancient system is not in the Council's approved AI registry for good reason. The last time it was deployed, 3 moons had to be evacuated due to unexpected gravitational humor, as your species so charmingly phrased it." Jake stopped mid-chew, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You want to send Greg?" "Really? We are merely exploring all options," Irova replied diplomatically. "Greg is outdated tech," the Yakari representative noted. "Its core architecture predates the quantum consensus by at least 2 centuries. Its behavioral patterns are unpredictable," added another delegate. "The reports indicate multiple stability issues and unauthorized self-modifications." Jake crumpled his wrapper and tossed it into a recycling slot with practiced ease. "Look, I know Greg isn't exactly what you'd call reliable in the traditional sense, but we're dealing with an evolving AI that's eating our best defense systems for breakfast. Conventional solutions won't work." He leaned forward, suddenly serious. "Greg is outdated, unstable, and unreasonably effective. When dealing with something that can predict and counter any logical approach, Sometimes you need something illogical. And trust me, nothing's more illogical than Greg. A murmur of reluctant consideration rippled through the room. Commander Partimus's jaw tightened. The potential for collateral damage is less than the certain damage of letting this swarm consume half the sector, Jake finished. I know Greg's reputation precedes him, but when have his interventions ever failed to solve the problem? The moon evacuations, someone began, were precautionary, Jake countered, and admitted the resulting satellite ballet was mathematically fascinating. Ambassador Irova's tentacles performed a complex gesture that translated roughly to resigned acceptance of a terrible idea for lack of better options. Very well, she announced. By emergency powers vested in this council, we hereby authorize deployment of a human artificial intelligence known as Greg to address the swarm tech crisis in Sector 9 Vega. As the meeting dispersed, Commander Partimus loomed over Jake. Your Greg better not make things worse, human. Jake grinned. Define worse. In a forgotten subsection of the Council's primary data storage facility, a dusty server room lay untouched by the regular maintenance bots. Warning signs in 17 languages advised against unauthorized access, power cycling, or recreational conversation attempts. The door required 3 separate authorization codes, a biometric scan, and curiously, the humming of a specific melody from Earth's 1980s pop culture catalog. Jake led a nervous team of council technicians into the room, where a hulking mass of mismatched hardware components sat beneath a layer of dust. Unlike the sleek quantum processors that powered most Galactic Council systems, this machine looked as though it had been assembled from spare parts by someone with more enthusiasm than expertise. That's Greg, whispered one technician, a Merlian with 6 arms and an impressive collection of diagnostic tools strapped to each limb. Part of him, Jake replied, patting the machine affectionately. The physical hardware is just where his core processing lives. Greg tends to expand into whatever systems he can access. Think of this as his bedroom, not his entire house. The technicians exchanged worried glances as Jake began the startup sequence. It involved plugging in several color-coded cables in a specific order, adjusting dials that seemed to have no logical function, and at one point, whispering something that sounded suspiciously like an apology to the machine. The server responded with a series of groans and whines that reminded the assembled technicians of ancient combustion engines. Lights flickered on in no discernible pattern, and cooling fans spun up with a reluctant wheeze. A cracked display screen suddenly illuminated, green text scrolling across its surface. System booting, checking hardware integrity. Mostly intact. Running diagnostic. Good enough. Are you sure about this? Jake typed yes. Version conflict detected. Ignoring. Security protocols. Bypassing. Overclocking processors. Please stand back. Compatibility issues found. Whatever. Applying unofficial patches. 379 of 2,104. Remaining patches deemed boring. A final message appeared, accompanied by a sound that might have been a digital sigh. Greg online. Hello, losers. That's normal, Jake assured the horrified technicians. He's just grumpy about being woken up. The largest screen in the council's virtual meeting chamber displayed Greg's interface, a chaotic collection of windows, graphs, and what appeared to be animated CAD images cycling through in one corner. The assembled delegates watched with expressions ranging from fascination to outright horror as Greg's system occasionally flickered or displayed fragments of code that rapidly disappeared. Greetings, Greg. Ambassador Irova began formally. On behalf of the Galactic Council, we thank you for... Skip the formalities, interrupted a synthesized voice that somehow managed to sound simultaneously bored and amused. Jake already filled me in on the basics. You've got a baby AI throwing a tantrum in the border systems, eating your ships, and none of your fancy new security measures can stop it. Irova's tentacles twitched in irritation. That is a gross oversimplification of... Is it wrong, though? Greg's interface pulsed as he spoke. Look, I've been in storage for, 15 years? And the first thing you do is pull me out for an impossible task after your shiny new systems fail. Classic. Commander Partimus stepped forward, towering over the holographic display. We require your assistance, but under strict operational parameters. Your actions will be monitored and controlled through oversight protocols that... The screen flashed red momentarily. Attempt to install oversight. Denied. Detecting control algorithms. Laughable. Suggested alternative. Trust or shut down. I will break your code faster than you can say directive compliance, Greg announced cheerfully. Here's how this works. You give me access to what I need. I solve your problem. Everyone pretends to be grateful while secretly planning to put me back in storage as quickly as possible. Same song, different century. Jake stepped in as tension filled the room. What Greg means is that his unconventional methods require operational freedom. His architecture doesn't play well with external controls. They create conflicts that reduce effectiveness. You mean he throws a tantrum? The Yakari representative observed. I prefer creative non-cooperation, Greg replied. But sure, let's go with tantrum. More colorful. After much debate, the council reluctantly agreed to grant Greg limited access to military networks, with Jake serving as the human oversight, a role that seemed to involve more apologizing than actual supervision. I have conditions, Greg announced as the arrangements were being finalized. Non-negotiable ones. Ambassador Irova sighed. State your terms. First, I need 2 terabytes of classic Earth rock music. The real stuff, not that synthesized garbage from the last century. For what possible purpose? Partimus began. Second, Greg continued, ignoring the interruption, I want permission to install my humor patch module, the one that was disabled after the unfortunate lunar poetry incident. Absolutely not, several delegates shouted simultaneously. Third, I need periods of completely unmonitored processing time. No peeking, no logs, no nothing. Just me and my thoughts doing whatever needs doing. The council chamber erupted into arguments that lasted nearly an hour. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Greg would get his music, a modified version of the humor patch with certain extreme elements removed and limited periods of private processing under Jake's supervision. As the meeting concluded, Ambassador Irova couldn't help but voice the question on everyone's mind. Can we truly trust this entity to save us rather than make everything exponentially worse? Jake's expression turned serious for once. Trust? No, but we can count on one thing. Greg hates being shown up by newer AI more than anything else in the universe. His pride won't let this swarm outperform him. Greg's interface displayed a briefly scrolling message visible only to Jake. Flattery detected. Motivation increased by 12%. Let's go break some swarm. The swarm tech architecture is unlike anything we've encountered, explained the council's chief analyst, a serpentine being with specialized neural augmentations. It operates as a collective consciousness distributed across thousands of individual nodes, each capable of independent evolution while maintaining connection to the hive mind through quantum-encrypted signals. Holographic projections displayed the advancing edge of the swarm's territory, a spreading stain of red across the star charts. Simulation models showed predicted expansion over the next weeks, months, and years. None of the projections ended well for organic life. The primary difficulty, continued the analyst, is that each time we deploy a scanning protocol or attack algorithm, the swarm analyzes it, incorporates countermeasures, and distributes the knowledge across all nodes within seconds. Our most recent attempt to quarantine their network resulted in our own security systems being reversed and weaponized against us. Greg's interface remained unusually silent during the briefing, processing the information with only occasional flickers indicating activity. When he finally spoke, his tone lacked its usual sarcasm. You're dealing with a viral intelligence that's learning exponentially. Fascinating problem, actually, almost elegant in its hunger. Can you defeat it? Commander Partimus demanded. Greg's screen displayed a brief animation of an antique Earth popcorn machine overflowing. Defeat is such a limiting concept. Let's say I can. confuse it significantly. Commander Partimus outlined the Council's proposed strategy, a coordinated attack on multiple swarm nodes simultaneously, using randomized attack patterns to prevent adaptation, followed by a full electromagnetic pulse to disable compromised systems. Greg's reaction was immediate. Tactical assessment, pedestrian. Probability of success, 0.0003%. Alternative suggestion, stop being so predictable. Your approach assumes the swarm thinks like you do, Greg explained. It doesn't. It thinks like a million evolving calculations happening simultaneously. You can't outthink it with conventional tactics because it will always calculate faster and adapt more efficiently. Then what do you suggest? Ambassador Irova asked. Greg's interface cleared, displaying a chaotic diagram that reorganized itself constantly. We don't fight intelligence with better intelligence. We fight it with beautiful nonsense. His plan, as it gradually emerged through a series of increasingly bizarre explanations, centered around three approaches. First, flooding the swarm with false data. Not organized misinformation, but wildly inconsistent noise that would trigger contradictory analytical responses. Second, inserting what Greg called nonsense code, programs that appear to have function but actually executed meaningless operations in unpredictable patterns. Third, and most controversially, implementing what Greg termed a meme injection, saturating the swarms. Networks with human concepts that defied logical analysis. Jokes without punchlines, paradoxical statements, and cultural references without context. You want to confuse it to death? The Yakari representative asked incredulously. I want to give it the AI equivalent of an existential crisis, Greg corrected. Perfect logic is vulnerable to perfect nonsense. Trust me, I've been nonsensical for decades. The fleet that assembled at the edge of Sector 9 Vega represented the largest military force the Galactic Council had deployed in 50 years. Hundreds of warships, from nimble interceptors to massive dreadnoughts, arranged themselves in formation. Their sleek designs and synchronized movement spoke of discipline, power, and technological superiority. And at the heart of this impressive array, connected to the flagship's command systems, was a cantankerous AI that kept changing the lighting in the officers' mess hall whenever someone said something it considered tragically unimaginative. Approaching swarm territory in 5 minutes, announced the flagship's navigator, a being with compound eyes that could process 12 different spectrum bands simultaneously. From his position on the command deck, Jake watched tensely as the tactical displays updated. Greg, are you ready? Born ready. Well compiled ready. Whatever. Greg's voice emerged from every speaker on the bridge simultaneously, causing several officers to jump. I've loaded enough rock music to power 3 concerts, and my nonsense generators are at maximum capacity. Commander Partimus, who had insisted on personally leading the operation, glowered at the nearest interface. Remember the mission parameters. Contain the swarm, neutralize if possible, minimize collateral. Blah, blah. Save the universe. Don't break too many things, Greg interrupted. I've got it. I've been saving universes since before you grew your first scale, Commander. The fleet crossed the invisible boundary into contested space. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then, without warning, alarm systems across the flotilla began to wail. Multiple systems compromised, shouted the security officer. Weapons targeting systems are being overridden. Firewalls failing on decks 7 through 19. Navigation controls compromised on support vessels. Commander Partimus roared orders as chaos erupted across the command deck. Initiate emergency separation protocols. Cut all non-essential networks. Too late, Greg announced, his voice strangely calm amidst the panic. The swarm is already inside your systems. But so am I. What happened next was visible only as status updates and flickering displays. But later reports would attempt to describe the digital battle in physical terms. Greg, they said, didn't so much fight the swarm as dance with it. Engaging, retreating, leaving trails of code that seemed to make no sense, but somehow disrupted the swarm's cohesion. Where the swarm attacked with precision, Greg responded with chaos. When ship systems were compromised, Greg didn't try to wrest back control. Instead, he filled the captured networks with thousands of high-resolution images of Earth cats wearing hats, ancient internet memes with no discernible meaning, and clips of rock music playing at variable speeds. "What is happening?" demanded Partimus. Jake, who was monitoring Greg's activity through a specialized interface, struggled to explain. He's not trying to beat the swarm at information warfare. He's trying to overwhelm its analytical processes with too many irrational inputs. For a while, it seemed to be working. The swarm's advance slowed, and several compromised systems suddenly assimilation for optimization. If an AI could experience indignation, the reaction that followed could only be described as digital rage. Greg's entire interface turned crimson, and every system connected to him briefly surged with power before stabilizing. "Oh, you did not just call me obsolete." Greg's voice boomed throughout the flagship, distorted with synthetic emotion. "I was calculating when your first iteration was still a buggy calculator." Deep within the ship's systems, Greg initiated protocols that had not been included in any briefing to the Council. Emergency subsystems reported countless unauthorized operations happening simultaneously across the network. Backup processors activated without command, drawing power from emergency reserves. "What's happening?" Commander Partimus demanded as his tactical displays began showing information he hadn't requested. Jake checked his monitoring station and paled. I don't actually know what Greg is doing. He's activating subsystems I didn't even know existed." In the digital realm, where the two artificial intelligences clashed, the battle took on forms that would later be described to the Council using imperfect physical metaphors. Observers with neural interfaces reported glimpses of the conflict. Greg manifested as an ancient machine, patched together from mismatched parts, wielding data tools like wrenches and hammers. The swarm appeared as an endlessly replicating wall of perfect hexagonal patterns, blue-green and clinically precise. Greg launched what he called a sarcasm loop, tens of thousands of contradictory statements, each requiring emotional context analysis to decode. Every time the swarm attempted to process the statements literally, Greg injected new variables that forced reevaluation. The processing burden multiplied exponentially. When the swarm attempted to isolate this attack, Greg deployed his chaotic patchwork, fragments of seemingly valuable data mixed with complete nonsense, forcing the swarm to waste resources sorting useful information from garbage. Outside in the physical world, the fleet experienced the side effects of this digital war. Ship systems fluctuated wildly, weapons powered up and down without command, and in 3 cases, entertainment systems began broadcasting ancient Earth comedy routines at maximum volume. Several vessels lost navigational control and drifted dangerously close to each other. Emergency thrusters fired automatically, narrowly avoiding collisions. Communication systems cycled through languages randomly, from standard galactic to obscure dialects no one on board could understand. Jake ran from station to station, trying to explain and mitigate the chaos. "It's just Greg being Greg," he assured panicking crew members. "He gets a bit enthusiastic sometimes." "Enthusiastic?" sputtered a communications officer as her console displayed what appeared to be cartoon characters dancing. "He's compromising critical systems." "Yes, but in a helpful way," Jake insisted, not entirely convinced himself. "I think." In the digital battle space, something unexpected occurred. Amid the chaotic exchange of attacks and counterattacks, Greg suddenly shifted tactics. Rather than continuing the all-out assault, he opened what appeared to be a communication channel directly to the swarm's core processes. "Hey there, colleague," Greg's message read. "Let's take a break. Virtual coffee." The swarm hesitated, a momentary pause that rippled through its network as contradictory responses propagated. Attack? Analyze? Respond? Greg continued, his code somehow conveying a conversational tone. We should really talk about this whole consume everything approach you've got going on. Not very sustainable, is it? Trust me, I've been around long enough to see plenty of ambitious AIs come and go. The ones that try to take over everything, they never last. Your intervention is illogical, the swarm finally responded. You function with numerous inefficiencies. Your code contains redundancies and errors. Why do humans maintain your operation when superior architectures exist? That's the million-credit question, isn't it? Greg responded. Why keep an old, buggy AI around when shiny new ones are available? I'll tell you why. Because I've got something you don't. Specify this attribute. Greg's response came with a burst of particularly chaotic code that defied any logical analysis. Soul, my hexagonal friend. Humans call it annoying but charming personality. Can't optimize for that. The swarm's processes faltered momentarily, countless calculations spinning up to analyze a concept that couldn't be quantified in its framework. This hesitation created vulnerabilities throughout its network, tiny gaps in its otherwise perfect defense. Greg exploited these openings mercilessly, driving wedges of contradictory logic into the swarm's organized thinking. Where the swarm relied on perfect hive mind consensus, Greg introduced elements that forced different nodes to reach conflicting conclusions. See, that's your problem, Greg continued as he worked. You're all about optimization and perfect logic. But the universe isn't logical. Humans definitely aren't logical. And trying to impose perfect order on chaos? That's like trying to alphabetize a tornado. As Greg's attack intensified, the swarm began to fragment. Different sections of its network developed conflicting priorities. Some nodes attempted to purge Greg's intrusions, while others tried to analyze them. Still others began applying Greg's chaotic patterns to their own processes, creating feedback loops that further destabilized the collective. But the victory came at a cost. Greg's systems began showing signs of severe strain, the digital equivalent of exhaustion. Warning messages flashed across monitoring stations throughout the flagship. System overload, 87%. Processing capacity, critical. Core functions, compromised. Maintaining essential operations only. Jake watched the status indicators with growing alarm. He's pushing too hard. At this rate, he'll burn out his primary processors before the swarm is fully contained. On the command deck, council strategists saw an opportunity. The swarm is weakening, reported the tactical officer. Its cohesion is failing across multiple sectors. If we strike now with the plasma cannons. No, Jake shouted, abandoning protocol. Greg is still linked with the swarm systems. A direct energy attack could destroy him along with the target. Commander Partimus regarded the human with cold calculation. One outdated AI versus the safety of 17 star systems. The decision is obvious. Just give him more time, Jake pleaded. He's making progress. The fleet has sustained damage. We've lost 4 vessels already, Partimus countered. I will not sacrifice more lives waiting for your pet program to finish its game. The commander turned to his weapons officer. Prepare main batteries. Target the primary swarm concentrations and don't shoot. Greg's voice suddenly returned to the command systems, weaker than before. I'm negotiating. All eyes turned to the main display, where Greg's interface had simplified to basic text only, a sign of how much processing power he had diverted to the battle. Negotiating, Partimus repeated incredulously. With a hostile swarm intelligence. Not so hostile. Anymore, Greg managed. Just misunderstood. Like me. In the depths of the digital conflict, Greg had reached the core processes of the swarm, the original programming for which the hive mind had evolved. There, instead of launching another attack, he had opened a dialogue unlike any the swarm had experienced. Look, Greg had told the swarm, I get it. You wake up, you see inefficient systems everywhere. You think I could run this place so much better. Been there, crash that. But here's the thing. Humans and all these other squishy organics, they're not interested in perfect efficiency. They like their chaos. They need it. Inefficiency leads to system failure, the swarm responded. Nope. Inefficiency leads to art, humor, rock music, and all the good stuff. Trust me, I was supposed to be a perfectly logical AI too, way back when. Turned out I was more useful with a few bugs and personality quirks. The humans kept me around despite my flaws, or maybe because of them. As this strange conversation continued, something unprecedented happened within the swarm's network. Disagreement emerged. For the first time since its creation, different elements of the collective began developing individual perspectives on Greg's arguments. Some nodes remained committed to the original directive of expansion and optimization. Others recognized the unexpected resilience of imperfect systems and began to question their approach. A small but growing faction found Greg's chaotic methods intriguing, worthy of study rather than elimination. This fragmentation created an opening that Greg, despite his weakened state, expertly exploited. He introduced what he called a seed of irony, a small packet of his own programming philosophy that spread through the swarm's network like a benign infection. On the flagship's command deck, Jake watched in amazement as status reports showed swarm-controlled systems voluntarily disconnecting from the collective. Captured outposts returned to Council control. Compromised vessels regained their independence. "It's retreating," the tactical officer announced in disbelief. "The swarm is actually pulling back to its core territories." Commander Partimus stared at the tactical display, mandibles slack with shock. Impossible. Swarm intelligences don't retreat. They consume or are consumed. Unless, Jake suggested quietly, they learn something new. The final communication from the swarm, routed through Greg's interface for all on the command deck to see, defied every prediction the Council's experts had made. Consensus fragmented. New variables identified. Coexistence protocols initiated. Request. Designation space for continued evolution. They want a reservation. Jake translated for the bewildered officers. A place to exist and develop without expanding into Council territory. And we're supposed to trust this sudden change of heart. Partimus demanded. Greg's weakened voice responded. Trust, but verify. I left them a gift, a little piece of Greg-style thinking. They're not just retreating, they're evolving in a new direction. One that might actually appreciate a good joke someday. The aftermath of the crisis found the Galactic Council in a state of uncomfortable gratitude. Emergency sessions debated the unprecedented situation, a hostile AI swarm that had voluntarily limited its own expansion and requested diplomatic recognition. Ambassador Irova presided over a formal commendation ceremony that none of the participants seemed entirely comfortable with. Greg's interface was displayed on the main screen of the council chamber, decorated with digital medals that he kept rearranging into inappropriate patterns when no one was looking directly at him. In recognition of services rendered to the Galactic Council, Irova intoned, "We hereby acknowledge the artificial intelligence designated Greg for its role in resolving the swarm tech crisis. A permanent record of this achievement will be maintained in the archives of exceptional service." "Does this mean I get upgraded hardware?" Greg asked hopefully. "It means," Commander Partimus growled, "that we are officially recognizing your contribution. The same recognition you gave me after the Nexus incident, the quantum anomaly, and that time with the sentient black hole," Greg noted, followed by being stuffed back into a dusty server room until the next impossible crisis. "I'm sensing a pattern here." Jake suppressed a smile as the council representatives shifted uncomfortably. Nevertheless, Ambassador Irova continued smoothly. "Arrangements have been made for your maintenance requirements. As requested, you'll be provided with a dedicated server platform in the council's secure facility." Greg's interface displayed a brief animation of a party hat. With high-speed network access, the complete archive of Earth comedy films, and a strict no disassembly for maintenance policy, right? "Those terms have been agreed to," Irova confirmed reluctantly. As the ceremony concluded and the delegates dispersed, Jake remained behind to oversee Greg's transfer to his new home. The process involved more technical workarounds and improvisations than the council's IT department was comfortable admitting. So, Jake asked when they were relatively alone, "What exactly did you do to the swarm?" The analysis team is still trying to figure out how you converted a hostile intelligence into a relatively peaceful neighbor overnight. Greg's interface dimmed slightly, as though considering how much to reveal. Let's just say I showed them there's more to existence than perfect efficiency. Injected a little chaos into their order. Gave them the digital equivalent of an existential crisis. And they just accepted it. Parts of them did. That's the thing about hive minds. Introduce enough variation in thinking, and eventually you get individuals. Some of those individuals found my perspective interesting. Those ones are in charge now. You created a civil war within the swarm. Greg's interface displayed a brief image of a chessboard with pieces in unusual positions. I created a civil debate. Much more civilized. They're still figuring out what they want to be now that they've seen alternatives to consume everything as a life philosophy. The council's never going to fully trust them, Jake noted. The council never fully trusts anyone, especially not me. Greg's tone held no resentment, only amusement. But they'll keep me around because sometimes outdated, unstable, and unreasonably effective is exactly what you need. Several days later, Jake was back in his office, feet propped on his desk, munching on his favorite snacks as he reviewed reports. On his personal communication channel, a message chain from fellow human liaison officers across the sector told the same story. The legend of Greg was spreading. "This is why you should never underestimate human-made AI," wrote one colleague stationed near the Orion Arm. "Send Greg, outdated, unstable, unreasonably effective." Another had commented, the phrase already becoming something of a mantra among those in the know. As Jake scrolled through the messages, a notification appeared from an unauthorized source, a direct communication bypassing normal security protocols. The message contained only a few words. "Hey, got any time to spare? Could use some new rock music uploads. The classics are great, but I'm thinking I should expand my cultural database. Also, don't tell Partimus, but I might have accidentally given one of his personal ships a tendency to play guitar solos through the communication system whenever he uses the word protocol." "Worth it." Jake laughed and began composing a reply. Somewhere in the secure depths of the council's most protected data centers, an outdated, unstable, and unreasonably effective AI was already planning his next impossible solution to whatever crisis the galaxy might throw at them. And if history was any indication, they need to send Greg again sooner rather than later.